Hey folks, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The American Enterprise Institute, which is a public policy think tank, has posted an opinion on what they believe the NTIA could do to get BEAD funding back on track. Be right back with that in just a moment. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Zcorum with Broadband Deployment News. So I want to take a look at this opinion piece that's with AEI, or the American Enterprise Institute, by the name of man by the name of Mark Jameson here. And as I looked at this think tank and who some of their fellows are that are on here, they seem to be leaning from a conservative viewpoint, and you'll see that referenced or kind of reflected here in this article. And I agree with a lot of what he says, because I happen to lean in that way as well. But I also have some opinions on something he says here that I don't necessarily agree with. But I wanted to look through this real quick, and we can see what they think. So you see here how to get the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program back on track. The Biden administration's flagship broadband initiative, the $42.5 billion BEAD program, is facing mounting criticism. And of course, this is the silly season. So we've got a lot of the criticism is based on politics and, the fact that this program's been going on for a while and we don't have anything yet to show for it as far as broadband deployment in the BEAD program. So that's part of that. Launched with the promise of bridging America's digital divide, BEAD has yet to connect a single household or business 3 years in. Many point to the program's design and the bureaucratic hurdles imposed by the NTIA as the primary causes of the delay. Others are sympathetic to the NTIA. There's a couple links there if you want to check that out. And I did link to this article in the description of the video if you want to read that. And then again, you can check out these links. So it's true that the NTIA is overseeing an enormously complex project, very complex, I would agree. Congress tasked it with designating and overseeing, or designing and overseeing, broadband expansion efforts in all U.S. states and territories, each of which must submit implementation plans. NTIA and the states hired hundreds of new staff, most of whom had little experience with broadband programs. While NTIA asserts that BEAD is a 10-year initiative and therefore is still on track, the reality is that current delays are unnecessary and the agency can take simple, actionable steps to accelerate progress. It is 10 years in. And, here's an example where they've hired hundreds of staff. So you would think with the hiring of hundreds of staff that we would be further along. They have, I know their goal, and I'm assuming they got there, maybe they didn't, but I know their goal at one point was to have a person for each state, because something different about this program than most prior programs, like RDOF and was it BTOP and those kinds of things, those were heavily driven from the federal perspective. The federal government was making all the decisions, and someone at some point realized the truth of the fact that the states should know and should be able to figure out where these funds should go. They are the best ones to determine, since locality is important, where broadband is needed, how it is best to meet those goals, especially considering how states are different as far as population, density of population, geography, those kinds of challenges. So that was good. But as you do that, then if you are going to have a lot of control at the federal level, in addition to allocating that to the states, then you need the ability for the states to be communicating with the federal government and getting support, those kinds of things. So there was a reason for that. I don't know if we needed that many people, but again, hiring that many people, you'd think it would be more on track. But again, it says here, not a lot of broadband experience with a lot of these folks. So it's probably more administrative experience, those kinds of things. First, it's saying, this is what NTIA should do. First, NTIA should grant states waivers for non-legislative requirements that adds unnecessary costs and administrative burdens. So one of the things that I was critical of from the very beginning, or there are things in the notice of funding opportunity for the BEAD program that really have nothing to do with broadband. What comes to mind would be environmental kinds of things. Because this was a Democrat passed legislation. They call it the bipartisan infrastructure law, but there were not that many Republicans that signed on, and those that did sign on would not approve of some of the things that were added to the notice of funding opportunity because it's not part of their view of how things should be handled. So the suggestion here is that some of those things should not have been included, and that would help. And it would, because there are obstacles in here that as the states look at these requirements, and then the subgrantees that have to meet some of these requirements look at this, some are considering, should we even bother with this? It's going to be very costly. We have to go through all these extra hoops. So that is a good point. It says, for example, NTIA's preference for fiber optic technology. I'm going to get back to that. Workforce mandates that impose union costs and price control policies are all provisions that go beyond congressional mandate. Yeah, and I mentioned the environmental stuff as well, but you got workforce mandates, trying to hire union workers and having all kinds of requirements there on who can do this work. And some of the requirements on who can do this work is to try to get it to the union workers. It's interesting that Donald Trump now politically has got a lot of support from union workers for various reasons. So some of that is kind of getting turned on its head. But still, it should be up to private companies who they hire, why they hire, and hopefully they're hiring to get good quality workers or quality work done. But you should not impose mandates on who they can hire, because that's just going to make it more expensive, which means you're going to have less funding to actually go to build out the broadband, the technology part, and it's going to take longer because you've got a more limited pool. Labor is going to be higher. You've got a more limited pool of people that can do the work. And again, that's part of, I think, the process here with the legislation was to try to keep this with the union workers, to try to keep wages up, those kinds of things. So again, that is a hindrance. Mentions price control policies. Those are, things that the internet service providers don't like. The states may not like it because, again, different states are going to have different situations where costs are high in some states like California. Costs are low in other states in very rural areas, or, labor costs are low, other energy costs are lower. So you can charge less in some places, you can charge more in others. You've got competition in some places, you don't have competition in others. Now, where there's competition, generally you're not going to be building BEAD stuff because you've got service there already. But again, that's really should be something under the purview of the internet service provider itself. They're not, according to legislation, was not supposed to be any price protection. Again, that's something that, or price minimums, that's something that the Republicans that signed on would not be happy about, or are not happy about. Then mentions fiber optic technology. I think that's one area where I feel like the NTIA has done a really good job trying to balance that, meaning that they recognize, and I think everyone recognizes, with the exception of those that can't do fiber, I think everyone recognizes that fiber is the preferred technology, because fiber is the technology that will carry us into the future over the same medium without having to change anything out. You've got limitations. Obviously, DSL is not going to be able to do that. DOCSIS cable modem service, they with the 10G initiatives are trying to get to 10G symmetrical, but really even that would be 6G maybe, I think is what they're saying. And certainly they could try to extend that. But cable operators, before we ever get to that point, cable operators are going to be deploying fiber and overbuilding themselves, I think, before they start jumping, through lots of technology hoops to try to squeeze even more out of their cable plant. It's going to be a while before cable operators overbuild themselves in areas where they're providing high-speed service, good quality, competitive service. But eventually, certainly in new areas, greenfield areas that we're talking about here for BEAD, they're going to be deploying fiber. They're not going to be deploying HFC network. Wireless can get up to pretty good speeds, but again, it's going to be, you've got, I don't know if they're going to be able to get to the speeds of fiber ever, and certainly not anytime soon. And then you've got low Earth orbit satellite, very limited as far as speeds, much, much better lately with low Earth orbit versus geosynchronous orbit, but still nothing that could compare with fiber or even a good cable modem connection. So I think, again, like I say, the NTIA has done a good job with fiber optic technology, trying to balance that where there's a preference for that, which there should be, but also providing alternatives in situations where it's just not an economic case to be able to do fiber. So I think they've walked that line pretty well as best they can. And you can tell because not everybody is happy. Those obviously that provide fiber are happy. But those that don't, like I said, those would be the folks that have an issue with that. Second, NTIA should reduce its micromanagement of state broadband plans. Currently, the agency involves itself in numerous minor details, such as the challenge process for determining whether a given area is eligible for BEAD funds. While Congress allows for providers to challenge whether a geographic region qualifies for funding, especially if the FCC maps misclassify areas as unserved, NTIA has turned this into a long, multi-step process. This excessive control delays funding, burdens state officials, and creates barriers for providers looking to expand service. So again, this is kind of a balancing thing that I think the NTIA has done pretty well. I'm sure they could have done better, but I think as far as one thing we want to make sure is this is a lot of money, and this is our money. This is taxpayer money. So if you're paying taxes, then your money is going to fund this eventually, hopefully, because we spend more than we actually take in via taxes. But again, you see the conservative slant there, but your money is going to fund this. So we want to make sure that we are spending this money wisely. So we don't want to just do it willy-nilly. We want to make sure that we've got controls in place, that we make sure that we're not overbuilding areas that already have broadband. We're not funding places that don't need to be funded, for example. So that can take time to make sure that you get it right. You want to measure twice, cut once, so to speak. But I'm sure they could have, with just government bureaucracy and again, some of the things in here that shouldn't be in here, that is causing delays. So I've got to give them a little bit of credit on trying to do the right thing and make sure that they're spending the money properly. The third, states should be allowed to use a portion of their BEAD allocations for transitional broadband services. Many states have more funding than they need to meet the program's goal of providing universal broadband coverage. And actually, if you look at some of the analysis, for example, that ACA Connects did, they feel like most states have enough money to completely cover their state with fiber and have some money left over for affordability programs, those kinds of things. A lot of states have almost enough to do that and just need certain portions where they'd have to do some alternate technologies. So that's true, but that doesn't mean, if a state should really try to maximize fiber. They should try to get as much fiber out there as they can and then look at the alternative technologies. And the NTIA has made allowances for that, and they've eased that up a little bit with even making some allowances for the low Earth orbit satellites that they'll talk about here in a moment. So they've done a good job of listening there, I think, and trying to adjust some of that. It says many states, we mentioned that. So it says in these cases, states should have the option to use BEAD money to subsidize interim solutions such as low Earth orbit satellite broadband. For instance, states could issue coupons to residents in remote, underserved areas to help them access LEO services like Elon Musk's Starlink. This would provide immediate relief to communities while long-term infrastructure is built over the coming years. Again, LEO satellite is an option. I think it should be an option, and just the question is, it's a little bit tricky on how to fund that since it's very different from a wired, even a fixed wire. It's very different from even a fixed wireless solution as far as how you would fund something that is satellites, right? But it should be there, and the NTIA has made allowances for that. But you don't want to go to make that choice too quick. Again, you want to try to get fiber everywhere you can, and that should be a last resort. Satellite should be an absolute last resort in certain areas. And then, you can maybe help people afford that with coupons and somehow subsidizing some of that. Some political obstacles may complicate the adoption of this idea, particularly NTIA's Fiber First policy, which contradicts Congress's directive that BEAD be technology neutral. LEO satellite services have gained significant traction in recent years. Well, it's new. So it wasn't around. It's only been around a few years. So it's gained traction, obviously. And where has it gained traction? It's gained traction in areas that don't have broadband. There's some folks that have it in areas where broadband is available. And I think it would be odd reasons, like maybe mobile where they take it, they've got it and they can use it at home, but then they can take that's on their RV and they can take it to campsites, those kinds of things, or maybe they need a backup internet of some kind. People are just not, if they've got wired available, they're not going to go for a satellite in an area where they have wired broadband service or even a good fixed wireless service. I don't think they will, just because of the cost involved. So that's why it's gained traction. It's good. It's a great technology and it's needed for these areas that are very hard to reach, but it's not going to replace a good wired or even fixed wireless broadband service. Customers who value performance and accessibility have adopted LEO rapidly, again, because they didn't have anything before. They had dial-up or they had slow DSL. So yeah, they love it. People who get it love it, but that's because they didn't have anything before. Despite this, the administration appears less enthusiastic about LEO, possibly due to the involvement of Musk, who has been vocal in his criticisms of the administration. So again, this is a conservative-leaning think tank. So they're bringing up Elon Musk there, who has recently endorsed President Trump or former President Trump for this next election. So you can hear a little bit of that coming out. Still, the popularity of LEO and fixed wireless services, both of which have seen strong growth, suggests that the market is diversifying away from traditional broadband solutions such as fiber and cable. In fact, there is evidence that LEO and fixed wireless, again, that's satellite, LEO satellite and fixed wireless, have compensated for the decline in wireline broadband subscriptions. And again, I want to comment on that because correlation is not necessarily causation or does not indicate causation. So we have here again, first of all, we've got two nascent kinds of technologies that came about in a similar time frame. We've got 5G fixed wireless, especially with the kind of the nationwide mid-band spectrum that you've got with T-Mobile and Verizon now, and you've got AT&T out there doing that. So that's something that suddenly became available. And then you've got low Earth orbit satellites that became available. That mostly being adopted, as I mentioned, in rural areas that didn't have access. But the 5G service being adopted in areas that maybe had competitive services. Quite often, let's say from a cable operator, where people didn't like the cable operator, they didn't like the fact that there were some outages here and there. They didn't like the fact that their price keeps going up, or that they have to keep calling every year to get the special promotion because they're locked into a contract. So some people found out, wow, I can try out this fixed wireless service, this 5G service. They send me this little box, I plug it in, and wow, it works. And, a lot of cases people did that. Some people didn't like it and they went back, but certainly a lot of people did look at that service. So the other factor, again, correlation doesn't necessarily indicate causation. The other factor that happened here was the pandemic during this time. So you had the pandemic take place. People were home. They didn't have access to some of these other technologies because they weren't really quite there yet, the 5G stuff and the low Earth orbit satellites. So they were doing fine with their internet at work and their phone at home. But when they suddenly had to work at home or they had to do school at home, it's like, wow, we really need a fixed connection here at home. So they got that. Then as the pandemic eased up, people started saying, you know what, we can go back to the phone at home. That's plenty for me. I can stream from my phone to my TV or whatever. And, I think that is part of it as well, is that was a loss of broadband subscribers from your traditional broadband operators at that point. And then again, the increase in broadband subscribers from people that didn't have it, the low Earth orbit satellite, and some of this fixed wireless service in areas where maybe there was not a good competitive wireline service where they can now get, a 5G, good speed 5G service. I think that's what we're seeing there. So that doesn't necessarily indicate that, that people are clamoring for that if they could get fiber access. I think everybody would love fiber if they can get it. So that's kind of the direction the company should be moving. Again, future-proof, moving into the, far years from now. You've got, today you've got GPON easily available if you've got fiber. You've got most operators now are getting XGS-PON, 10G PON. They're not necessarily offering that, but they've got those cards where they can quickly update the technology if they need to. And then we've got 25G PON, 50G. Some might jump from 10 to 50. We don't know yet. That's so far out there. Yet those technologies are available, yet we don't need them yet. So even though some have 25G, and there are people like in Chattanooga, the city, the EPB there, Chattanooga, Google Fiber in some places saying, hey, you can get 25 gig service if you want. I think so. I think they're offering that, but it costs a fortune. Nobody really needs it. It could be at some point we just skip that and go straight to 50. We'll have to see how the technology plays out there. It says a more flexible approach to broadband policy, one that considers market realities and customer premises, would go a long way for speeding up the deployment of vital services, cutting red tape, streamlining NTIA's oversight processes, and allowing for the use of interim and niche technologies like LEO could help BEAD deliver on its promises much sooner. Ultimately, NTIA has the tools to improve BEAD's implementation and ensure that this massive federal investment delivers meaningful, timely benefits to Americans in need of better broadband access. So again, I looked at this and you can tell there's a conservative slant in here because this is an organization that believes in smaller government. It's going to believe more in states doing, again, more local government versus a federal government, reducing the size of federal government, reducing regulations. So you're hearing a lot of that in here. You're also hearing about the low Earth orbit satellites. And again, that could be a little lobbying for Elon Musk, who is supporting Donald Trump. I don't know. I'm kind of reading that into there as well. But I think low Earth orbit satellites should be, again, a last resort. It's great technology. It's amazing what Elon Musk has been able to do with that. And he's got lots of, I think, 2 million or more subscribers, if I recall. So he's done a great thing. And there's definitely a place for that, but not necessarily as something that would be funded unless it's absolutely necessary. So see, got a couple comments here from Noisy Ando One, maybe off topic, but my city is planning on getting GoNet speed to lay fiber in the area. That's great, fiber. I think GoNet speed got like 9.6 million or something similar like that. Also, I've been hearing developments of 100G coherent PON, but this is not coming anytime soon. Yeah, it's true. So coherent PON's another thing that's being worked on. It's interesting, kind of the consolidation of. I went to the SCTE cable show that was here in Atlanta just a couple weeks ago, and there's a lot of talk about fiber, and there has been. I mean, as I've said before, cable operators, they are all about fiber. They don't want to overbuild themselves right now because that's very, very costly. So they don't need to. They're providing pretty good service. So unless they feel they need to overbuild themselves, or in the future at some point they will, when their infrastructure starts to need to be replaced. But right now, they can do quite a bit with DOCSIS. But the future, I think they all recognize, is fiber. They've been doing fiber for years because the further you get fiber into your cable plant, then the more reliability you have, the faster speeds you can offer. You get digital fiber going far out close to the customer, and eventually get so close that it almost makes sense to just go fiber all the way to the curb, all the way to the customer. But that's the really expensive part, because when you do that, then you suddenly have to go out and touch every customer's site. You've got to provide them new equipment versus just getting that fiber as close as you can. So, but yeah, coherent PON, that's something that is being worked on. The SCTE and Cable Labs they're working together on a lot of fiber kinds of technologies, looking toward the future for that, both to help them in the current infrastructure, the hybrid fiber coax infrastructure that they have today, as well as fiber to the home. For greenfield, like I said, cable operator, that's what they're going to do. That's going to be their first choice. Where they go is going to be, where they go new, it's going to be fiber. And then eventually overbuilding themselves in certain areas. And some cable operators are doing that now. There's cable operators that are methodically looking at territories and saying, okay, where next can we go to replace our old infrastructure with fiber? And they're doing it that way, as well as in new greenfield areas. So great thing about PON is that the infrastructure doesn't change much. You can replace the ports on the OLT and change out the ONT. That's true. So you've got the fiber out there, and it's like cable. I mean, cable's really done an amazing job with, if you think back to DOCSIS 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 3.1, now we got 4.0. They've done a great job of squeezing more and more speed out of their infrastructure, and getting better reliability as well by taking advantage of proactive network maintenance, PNM tools, those kinds of things, PMA, profile management application tools. By the way, check out our website if you're a cable operator and you want to increase the reliability of your cable plant, increase the capacity in your DOCSIS 3.1 plant. We can help there. So check out zcorm.com and look for PMA or PNM. So the cable operators have done a great job using that coax, plus, like I said, putting more and more fiber, reducing the amount of coax, and putting more fiber in their plant. But it's absolutely true. If you've got fiber, you've got that glass running, then, like I said, you've got a GPON card. And a lot of times you don't even have to, you don't have to swap out the OLT. You just put in a 1 gig card, a GPON card, or an XGS card, or a 25G card, and even a 50G card, I believe, is going to be able to work in the same OLT, the same equipment. So you're just swapping out a card, and you may have to replace, the ONT on the customer side. I'm not sure about that, but so that's true. That's why fiber is the preference, very much future proof, because as Noisy Ando One says here, you don't have to change out a lot when you want to get to those faster speeds. So, well, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, if you give me a like, I'd like that. And if you haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button ring the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. So I will see you next time for Broadband Deployment News. Take care. Bye-bye.